Shalom, everyone. Happy Wednesday to you. This is NETIV's night. Um, I don't know how many of you really have done any study of angels. The last 2 weeks I've been talking about men who became angels. I first started out with Metatron, who was really the originally Enoch. And then I went from Enoch to Elijah, who later became known as Sandalphon. Well, tonight I want to talk to you about angels. Never were human, always were angels. But I want to basically, and for some of you, it's kind of going to be a shock, but I want you to understand that, well, we all think we know who the angel of death is. And the answer is probably, excuse me, you probably don't, because there's not one angel of death. In fact, there's more than two, but I'm only going to share with you two of them tonight because it's just fascinating to see them. Share. So, anyway, as we're going through, I want to talk about the sources of death. Who's in charge? And I want you to understand there are two angels that are going to be actually in charge. And I just left the rest of the screen up so you could see what we're going to eventually go into. But there are two angels. The first one was actually an archangel, and his name is Samael. Now, Samael is not Samuel. It's not Satan, although sometimes he is referred to as Satan. But understand that Satan is not an angel of death. Satan is an accuser. He is the prosecuting angel. He is not designed to bring end to life. That job is responsible to two people that I've really researched. There's more that have been listed, but I've only done two. The first one is Samael. The second one that you're looking at is the angel called Malach Ha Mevet. Now, Malach is the Hebrew word for messenger because angels are our messengers. They deliver a message. And in this case, he's delivering a message of death. Now, one of these angels deals with evil. The second angel deals with the natural causes, the reasons for death. He's basically not, he is there to do God's bidding and do it the way God has outlined it. Now, I gave you a picture of an angel at the door with a sword in his hand because that is the description that the Yiddish, the New York Jews would use to talk to us about angels and to talk to us about the angel of death. So I brought this picture in. But I want you to understand as we go through this, Samael and Malach both have, well, they're both Jewish in mysticism, and they're also involved in a lot of folklore. And so sometimes they're considered distinct entities, and sometimes because we don't know, we oftentimes put them together or we compare them. And so I want to do some of that tonight, and I want to give you some understanding about what's going on. Samael is very complex. He's an ambivalent character in Jewish tradition. He is portrayed, often portrayed, as a powerful archangel with both divine and adversarial aspects. Now, understand, we normally think of the archangels as Michael and Gabriel and all of the dominant angels in God's kingdom. But there are archangels which are not what we would consider to be on the line of a Michael or a Gabriel. Again, he's basically responsible for, in fact, his name speaks to judgment, to destruction, and sometimes temptation, but that's not his real function. His real function is to bring destruction and judgment. He's oftentimes the one that we would use when we're talking about, for example, the killing of the firstborn. He's the angel that was supposedly passing over the city. He's the one that was taking the firstborn that didn't have blood marks on the door. He's also found in several other places. Hezekiah, when Hezekiah was was surrounded by Sennacherib and his 176,000 men. It was him, Samael, which took out the armies. He is the angel. So he's a source of fallenness, but at the same time, he is also just simply, for lack of a better term, he is an executioner. He is the one responsible for mass deaths, oftentimes. Kind of like, well, let me go on. All right. Okay. Malik HaMevet. And Mevet, the root is met. The root is death. So this is truly the messenger of death. This is his function. Most generally in Jewish tradition, he is called the angel of death, not Samael. Samael is for distinct groups and for the punishment of different groups. He's also responsible for carrying out divine decrees of death. In other words, there is some one person who needs to be taken out. That is his function. Now, while his identity varies depending on the different texts, he always is depicted as one who severs the soul from the body. That's what his function is. So he is not necessarily evil. He is simply doing God's work and bringing home the soul from the person himself. I hope you understand. That's what he is there for. Now, as you go through this, in some traditions, Samael is identified as the angel of death, making it synonymous, but it's not. It's got to be separated from Melech, who's actually quite different. Now, besides them is Satan. Please understand, he is simply an accuser. He's prosecuting by driving our souls crazy with the guilt that we do from all of the things that we have going on within us. Samael is sometimes identified not just, he's also identified as Yetzer Hara, which is our evil inclination. And he is often seen as the adversary, but he's not. He attempts to, is there a break in my internet? I don't think so. Well, anyway, in some traditions, he's seen as the husband of Lilith. And I don't know if you know who Lilith is. Lilith was actually, if you go back to Genesis chapter 1, she is seen as two different beings. First off, she is seen as, when in Genesis chapter 1, when it begins to ask the question of who God created man, he created him male and female. The first act is that. Then we go to chapter 2, where we now see in chapter 2 that God created Adam and then took from him Eve from his side. So who was the woman who was found in Genesis chapter 1? Lots of mystical understandings that this is the character called Lilith. Now understand that Lilith's name, the root of her name, is Lila. Lila, as in Delilah. Delilah means door, Dalit. Lila is night. So Delilah in Samson's story is the door to darkness, because after she finds out what his secret is, he loses his sight and he becomes blind. But Lilith speaks of night. It speaks of darkness. If we go back further into Genesis chapter 1, we go back to find out that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and then there was darkness. Lila. That's what we're talking about. So Samael has married this woman called Lilith, or at least that's what is understood. There's many, many stories in some in the Talmud, in Bava Batra 69 deals with the same character. So Lilith is considered oftentimes as Adam's first wife. She's also considered as a demon. And as a demon, she appears in Isaiah, where she's the howling banshee that's found in, I think it's Isaiah 40. So she's an interesting character in and of herself, and maybe sometime we'll teach about her. But the understanding is that in traditions, many of the recent ones, now I say many of the recent ones because as we're looking at this, I want you to understand that this goes over a long period of time. In the beginning, there were lots of stories that were transmitted one to another. The longer the stories have been transmitted, sometimes there's been other stories added. Some of the stories regarding Lilith also come from other languages, other countries, other beginnings. And so sometimes these beginnings become part of her story. So no one is really certain who Lilith was or is. So the understanding, or the best understanding we have at this point in time, is that she is the wife of Samael because of some of the demonic things. If she is the demon, one of the stories, or many of the stories, I don't know how many of you ever noticed that there are some Jews who have a string that's attached to their wrist. It's red. The string is there to ward off Lilith. We also know that in the beginning, there's a string that's attached to the bed of the babies so that Lilith doesn't cause the baby to become still. And so there's lots of stories about her cunning and her evil. Now, if she was a woman, the story of Lilith is the fact that Lilith, when she found herself with Adam, she chose not to make herself subservient to Adam. She said that I am just as equal as he is, and walked away and left. Later, she returns, according to the stories, and she is the one who finds Adam despondent, having been thrown out of the garden, sitting in water. And she causes him to submit semen, creating little demons. And those are from her. Moloch, on the other hand, is often portrayed as a shadowy figure. He's sometimes holding a sword that's dripping with poison. And that's the way he's pictured most often in the Talmud. Samael, on the other hand, is most often pictured in the Zohar or in other midrashic writings. Enoch talks about him in the second book of Enoch. Now remember, there are three books of Enoch. The first one is in Hebrew. The second one is in Ethiopian, and the third one is in Slavic. So there's three books written at three different periods in time. The oldest one is written in Hebrew, but it is also, because it was a part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's not complete. So there's missing parts that people have attempted to fill in. Now, in our story then, and let's get to our story. So let's stop sharing for a second. And I want you to understand what's going on. As we look at our characters, there's a relationship between them. But there's also a relationship with lots of other things. So let me try to find my spot here. Samael is a corrupter. Best way to put it. Some identify him also as the chief architect of the Sitra Atra, the other side. It's the realm of impurity. It's the realm of unholiness. He's associated only with Gevarah, with judgment. Everything is about that, only he distorts judgment. So the judgment is often cruel and it's very destructive. And unlike rabbinic thinking, Satan, who merely acts as a prosecutor, but ultimately obeys God, Samael is more rebellious, ruling over the demonic realms, or the realm that they call the klipot. That's a system that blocks the light of divineness. Samael is also identified as a serpent. Now, being a serpent, he's going to be associated with Nahash, the serpent in the Garden of Eden. In fact, in some midrashes, he exploits he exploits Eve. In fact, there's a whole section in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer and chapter 13 dealing with Nahash and how he fits into that struggle. Now, this identification deepens his connection to Satan because he is now seen, because of this, as both a tempter and one who brings evil and brings death. The Zohar expands on this whole idea and says that Samael is, well, he's a demonic counterpoint to holiness. Now, as we're going through this, understand that I'm trying to explain to you two characters at the same time, which is not easy. So we need to know that Samael is, well, he's more than Satan, and he is more evil than Melech. Samael's role in the end of days, he's the connector. He's the one who leads the fallen angels. If you were reading the book of Revelations, he would be the character that you would associate with the satanic fall. Now, prophetically, in Kabbalistic thought, he intertwines evil with revelations. In other words, when Eve was being tempted, he was prophetically telling her, don't worry about dying immediately. In fact, he pushes her into the bush so that she touches the fruit, knowing that it didn't kill her instantly, so she feels safe and comfortable. But later on in the age that's to come, the final confrontation between the forces of holiness and the Sitra Achra, or the forces of Samael, he finds himself on the wrong side of the tracks. And there seems to be several discussions as to whether he himself will survive and be returned to being a holy angel, or whether he will disappear. He's also responsible, or said to be a part of, the idea of Gog and Magog. He's said to represent Edom or Rome, and he's said to represent Amalek, and he's said to represent everything that tends to try to crush Israel. In the end, his power is going to be very limited. In fact, in Isaiah 25:8, it talks about the fact he will swallow up death forever, and the Lord God will wipe away tears from all the faces. Now, in the Zohar, it repeats this idea of him being the destructive angel by identifying him as one who will be eliminated. That's why there's no definition as to what's going to happen. He is going to completely be destroyed, or all of the impurity that's within him will be completely destroyed. So we don't know which. Now, in the Midrash, in Yalkut Shimoni, Isaiah chapter 60, it tells us about the final redemption, that God will take Samael and slaughter him before the righteous, signifying the total consequence of evil. That same idea is used to describe the destruction of Leviathan. Remember, Leviathan was a serpent that's found it's found about 6 different places in the scriptures. The most common place is found in the book of Job. But the idea of that lizard is the fact that it was huge. In fact, there were 2 of them that were actually created. God killed one so that it would not destroy the world that he was now creating. So one of them is already dead, the female, and only the male is still left. And the male represents Samael. And so in the end, when the final outcome is, Samael, or Leviathan, will be destroyed, completely eliminating the idea of evil. His connection is to other angels also. Remember when we talked about in the book of Daniel, the book of the chapter 4, where it talks about the watchers? Remember, the watchers were those who came down from heaven during the days of Jacob, or Jared. I keep wanting to say Yored, because that's his true name. But anyway, comes down, and he himself, all of these angels come down, and Samael is said to be the leader of this group. And they come down, they find wives, and they create or father what we would call Nephilim, or giants. Now, while Samael is still explicitly named among them, he's not really named among them. He shares many characteristics with them. Now, their leader was supposedly called Azazel. We recognize Azazel because when we go to Yom Kippur and the sacrifice that's made on Yom Kippur with the two goats, one goat is to go to Azazel and the other goat was for God. So the God's goat is sacrificed and placed on the altar. Azazel's goat is led out into the wilderness where it is shoved over a cliff where it begins to fall apart. But before they shove it over, he has a red thread or ribbon that's tied to his horn. That red thorn or that red ribbon is taken off, and while the animal is tumbling to the ground, that red turns white, so that your sins will become white as snow, though they are red as crimson. Goes back to the book of Isaiah, chapter 1. Now, 2 weeks ago, I shared with you the idea of Metatron, who was originally Enoch. Samael, on the other hand, contrasts with him because Metatron is the highest angelic prince of divineness. He's known as the lesser Yahweh, or the lesser, I shouldn't say Yahweh, his Havayah is the name that you should use if you're not going to use Hashem. He's the angelic reflection of God's divine understanding. Samael is the chief force in opposition. So they're mirrored throughout. Metatron and Samael are mirrored throughout the Bible. I was just thinking about it the other day, and I would say Metatron is like Moses, and Samael is like Pharaoh, or Jacob is like Metatron, and Esau is like Samael. Now, in the War Scroll, which is also Dead Sea Scrolls that was found, there's a scroll, or the portions of that scroll deals with the sons of light versus the sons of darkness. It's a cosmic war that goes on in the heavenlies. And so as we're going through or talking about this, the idea is the fact that the sons of darkness would be following Samael, while the sons of light would be following Metatron. Now, we've talked about the fact that Satan is not really the angel of death. He is simply the adversary, or one who is to be opposed. Now, while Satan is prosecuting, as we find in the Talmud in different places, Samael just is deeper involved in corruption. He blends temptation and judgment and destruction and puts them all together, causing constant death, because that's his mission. Now, other traditions suggest that Samael will not be destroyed, but transformed. And this is where I get to the understanding of the word tikkun. Tikkun is about rectification. When one changes, when one comes towards God, God comes towards him. And the understanding is the fact that they go through a process of rectification. Now, Samael comes from the right side, or he comes from the side of Gevarah. And so as he comes closer to God, he moves closer to Hesed, to mercy. So Samael right now is a very necessary evil, and that's why God has created him. That's what he's here for. He, like Satan in some sense, tests humanity for God. He is the idea of, well, impurity, period. Now, in the story, as we're going through, I want to pick up two other characters that have a portion in this. Now, I didn't do much with our character called Malik, but Malik has a very limited job, and he's not found in very many texts, to be very honest with you. But I do want to talk about two other beasts that find themselves on the side of Samael. One is Leviathan, which we talk about. That's the lizard or the sea serpent that we find in the oceans, that we find several times written in the scriptures. In fact, let me tell you, he's in Job chapter 3, verse 8. He's in Job chapter 41, verses 1 to 34. He's in David's Psalms 72, 13 and 14. And he's also in Psalms 104, 26. And he's also again in Isaiah 27, 1. So he's in the scriptures multiple times. He is a monstrous dragon who has a famishing appetite. And if it wasn't for the death of the female, no life would ever exist on this earth. But he is a monster that's been described as having bad breath. The concept of the bad breath is the idea of the fact that his klipot, his husk of impurity, is so strong that it's easily smelled. People can tell when death is around. In the Zohar, in the second book of Zohar, chapter 34a, it describes him as being a serpentine force of unrestrained desire, deeply connected with the original serpent. That was his function. Now, as you go through this, you'll also find out Leviathan is also associated with Rahab. Now, the Rahab we're talking about is not the Rahab that ends up marrying Joshua. Rahab is simply another being. It's a mythical sea monster, much like Leviathan. A second beast I want to talk to you about a little bit, and that's the fact of the beast called Mehamot, the beast of the earth. He's found earlier in the book of Genesis. In fact, he's that monster that's found in the animals that are mentioned in Genesis chapter 1, verse, the sixth day. He is a counterpart to Leviathan. Only he's the great beast that lives on dry land. So you have a beast in the ocean or in the waters, and you have a beast on dry land. Now, both of them are talked about in the Talmud in Bava Batra 75a. They will be both alive at the end of days, and eventually they will be the practicer. Well, that's not a good word. Behemoth and Leviathan will fight it out in the end of days, culminating in the mutual destruction of these two beings or these two animals that are created. So it'll be a very interesting end of days. We oftentimes talk about Behemoth and Leviathan as Gog and Magog. We give them that credit. And the idea is Gog and Magog is obviously a natural understanding, but Behemoth and Leviathan have a connection to the spiritual world that are going to be dealt with at the same time. Samael represents an intellectual and a corrupt spirit, while Leviathan just simply represents raw kaya, or raw, what's the word I'm looking for? Chaos, unrestrained desires. Leviathan's role is to be a coiling serpent, something that, again, introduces spiritual distortion into this world. Now, in some Midrashic writings, Leviathan is depicted as a mount or a chariot ridden by Samael, just as Behemoth is sometimes said to serve as the throne for other demons. This will mean that Samael rules over the chaotic sea or the world in the evil sense, manipulating Leviathan as he does all through it. Now, all three of these are going to be found at the end of days. Again, it's in Bava Batra 75a. That if you read that one page in the Talmud, and you don't have to have a Talmud in order to do that. If you want to go to I find it easiest to go to the site that belongs to the Chabad.org, Chabad.org, and type in Bava Batra 75A, and it will scroll you to that page, and you'll be able to read the entire article so you get a better understanding. Now, after Leviathan is slain, his flesh is going to be served to the righteous in this world. In other words, this feast represents the consumption of unrestrained forces, meaning that the divine sparks that are trapped in this animal will be freed and will reintegrate and will become part of holiness. Leviathan's skin will be used to make a huppah, a canopy for the righteous, symbolizing the final spiritual connection or protection over these things in the world. The entire battle is not just a literal battle or war, but a deep symbolic struggle within it's conflicting energies within creation. We have very little understanding of energy. Just recently, I was reading an article in dealing with the new chips that they're working on AI. And in working in it, there was something happened, and they found that the chip actually began to speak, not intelligent words, but it created noises, creating for us a rather strange idea well, it's not a strange idea. It's the idea that we have just tapped into another world, that there's more than just the world that we live in, but there's a world beyond this world, not simply the world of paradise. This is another actual world. And as we get closer to understanding and using AI and all of the other things, there's a suspicion that what we're going to do is end up tapping into this other place. And so it's becoming rather strange and rather frightening. But anyway, Samael is an intelligent being, but when he finally reaches his end, all of the distortions, all of the judgments, all of the unholiness that he does will be taken away. All of that will collapse. The only thing that will be left will be divine order. That will be it. Reality itself, death, evil, separation from God, will no longer exist. I believe that will be coming soon. There's a lot of things that are pointing on the horizon to the end of Hamas and the end of all of those things that we're thinking about. But anyway, that's for another time. I'm really through with what I want to talk to you about, and hopefully I gave you something that you can latch on to. But understand that we simply don't understand angels. We don't understand all their functions. We don't understand that every blade of grass has its own angel, that everything has an angel. The room that you are sitting in is filled with angels. There are great numbers there. Some of them because of things we've said, some of them because of protection. We have both those that we've created for the good and those we've created for evil. And many of them are with us constantly. That's what's whispering in your ear when you deal with your own frustrations about things that you did or shouldn't have done. That'll be there. So I want you to understand that this is a simple discussion, but hopefully there's more that you can glean onto. And I suggest you try looking up angels, different groups of them, and begin to study them yourself. There are books that you can get on angels, good books. If not, you can certainly go to the internet. I would suggest you went to sites like Chabad, sites like inner.org, which is Rabbi Ginsburg, and Aish. Those are three sites that I go to. But there's a lot of good places to go in the Jewish community that will give you that information. So think about going back to the Bible and then going out and looking up, learning beyond. One of the things that's coming to my attention now these days is the fact that people, when AI finally takes hold, people will become dumber because you see, they won't look up anything. The information will be done for them. They don't have to go hunting. The only problem is that it's not all correct because you see, it conglomerates all of the information that's out there and makes no judgment on what's right or what's wrong. It just simply gives it to you. So as you're going through this, I suggest you do it through those three sources. Now you can go, and I've gone, and I know Rod's gone, to Chat GDP, which is an AI site that's American. But again, right now, it's not complete and it's not totally correct, but it'll give you places that you can go and places that you can start to begin to unwind an idea. It'll even help you write an article if you want one, although I wouldn't suggest you do that. I would suggest you learn the information and then write your article rather than just simply trust the machine. But that's where we're at in these days and age. Time is drawing short. Lots of things are happening. And so the computers are becoming much, much smarter. But it also means that people are doing less and less. So be one of those that does more and more rather than less and less. So let me be done now. And if you have questions or ideas that you want to talk about, just let me know what you want to hear or understand.